Hey guys, today I'm going to be making a mini hexagonal prism tower out of this 3x3. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it like a really deep enclosed cube, and then I'm also going to cut the tips of the corners off, so hopefully it'll make a cool shape. So I already tightened up the 3x3 and I also glued the caps of the corners on, so hopefully it won't fall off when cutting. So now I'm just rotating the bandsaw table to 45 degrees so I could make a really deep cut enclosed cube. So I just started cutting off 6 of the edges like an enclosed cube, but I did it much deeper. So I just realized that I'm actually going to do some modification to the center pieces later on. There's no point in having the center caps on, because they're just going to end up being wasted because they're going to break and I won't be able to use them. So I'm just going to take them off now and then I'll deal with them later. So now I can finish cutting this on the bandsaw. You have to be really careful when making these cuts, because the surface area that the cube is sitting on is going to be much smaller and it'll be easier to lose control. So this is what the first cut looks like, and I'm just going to be doing the rest of them in the same way and a band of 6 around the corner. So this is most of the cutting complete now. If you're going to do this, just make sure not to cut too deep, because it's a little bit hard to control it while cutting it on the bandsaw like this. So now it just looks like a really small enclosed cube. So since I super glued all the caps on before cutting, now I could just go straight to sanding the faces closer to their final dimension on the belt sander. And now it's much closer to the shape I want, so I could cut off the tips of the corners now. So I rotated the table to 34 degrees because I found that that's the best angle for cutting off the corners like this. And then I just cut off the tip of the corner piece because I wanted to get the corner pieces to a certain dimension where they would look pretty cool. Alright, so that looks pretty good. So since I sanded it on the belt sander before filling, some of the plastic melted and then it got inside the pieces, so I have to use a blade to clean it out. And this is actually a pretty important step, because if you don't do it, then there could be little air bubbles under the Apoxie Sculpt that you'll need to fix later, and it's pretty annoying because it's a really small hole. So I just used Apoxie Sculpt and I filled all the pieces in. I didn't fill in the corner pieces at this point because I wasn't sure how much I was going to be sanding them. To speed up the dry time of the Apoxie Sculpt, I baked the cube at around 150 degrees Fahrenheit for almost 30 minutes. So after it was all dry, I just sanded it on the belt sander to get a little bit closer to its final shape. So now it's time to start extending the pieces. So first, to start getting ready, just take off the remaining stickers, because you can't extend onto the stickers, you need to take them off. And then just use some rough sandpaper, maybe 80 or 60 grit, and then just slightly roughen up the faces to help the Apoxie Sculpt stick. So when you're done with that, just get out the Apoxie Sculpt, and then you could disassemble the cube so that you could start extending the pieces. And then just mix up equal parts of Apoxie Sculpt part A and part B, and make sure you're not mixing up too much, because it's better to just have to mix up more than to have too much to do all the pieces. And then just place the Apoxie Sculpt on the piece and then shape it into what the piece should look like. Just try to know what the final shape of the piece should look like so that you're not using too much and you don't just have to sand off a bunch. And then after I finish extending all the pieces, I just let them dry. And then when they're all dry, just use sandpaper and then sand down all the parts on the inside of the cube that would prevent it from being assembled. This is really necessary, because if you don't do this, then the pieces just won't sit together correctly, and it'll be much harder to get the final shape. And then when you're done with that, just reassemble the puzzle, and then you could start sanding it on the belt sander. So now it pretty much just looks like a smaller hexagonal prism tower. So now it's time to start working on the center pieces. I started by just cleaning out the melted plastic, because that's going to prevent the center caps from being able to go in properly. And then I just took out all the center pieces, because I was going to need to modify each one of them to make them work. So it might be hard to tell, but I actually shortened the center pieces a little bit. Like if you were to put them in a regular 3x3, the center caps would be lower than all the other pieces. And basically you can just do this by cutting off some of the material with a blade or sanding it with some sandpaper. I'd recommend using sandpaper so it'll be perfectly flat. So I just sanded the center piece to the perfect height where the center cap would just fit on without hitting the bottom. So I just started getting the center caps ready to be extended by doing basically the same thing of roughening the surfaces to help the Apoxie Sculpt stick. So then I just made the extension basically the same way as how I made all the other ones. Alright, so I ran into a bit of a problem with these center caps. So basically I put a little bit of Apoxie Sculpt inside, because I thought that I would be able to leave the screws accessible if I just filled it like that. But these just don't go on the center caps now because there's some Apoxie Sculpt in the way of it, of that little thing, and I can't lower it because the screw's gonna be there, so the only option is to carve out all this material. But I did that once and it's a lot of work. I used a drill and then I just drilled inside. So I'm just gonna redo the rest of the center caps. So if you're gonna do something like this, make sure that you leave enough space in the middle. This normally won't be a problem, but with this mod, since I lowered the center pieces a little bit, it is a problem. So I'm not gonna be able to leave the center pieces accessible. I actually can for the rest of this build, but then at the end I'm gonna have to seal them permanently. So I ended up just carving out the material with a drill, and then I just reassembled it and then put the center caps on. So I sanded on the belt sander, and then the center caps ended up getting so small and breaking. So I have to do a lot of modification to them to make them work, and I actually don't really know how to do that. So I'm going to do it off camera, and then I'm going to completely finish it and sticker it, and then I'll show it to you in my next video. I would just rather not do it on camera if I don't really know how to do it, because I just think it would be easier to not have to record it. But anyway, thanks for watching this video, and of course this is my last video of 2018, so Happy New Year everyone, and I'll see you in my next video.